Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to Focus on Health. I'm your host, Peggy Mello. Today's guests are Judith Avner, Executive Director of the Brain Injury Association of New York State, and a brain injury survivor, Robin Cohn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Judith, why don't you start by telling us about the organization?
Sure. The Brain Injury Association of New York State is the state affiliate of a national organization called the Brain Injury Association of America. We are a statewide organization, membership organization that consists of people with brain injuries, family members, professionals who serve them, advocates, programs that provide services to people with brain injuries, and just people who are interested in the area. And we offer an array of services throughout New York State. We are based, our headquarters is based in the Capital District in Albany, but we do have services throughout the state, and they are quite varied. As I said, they include support groups and chapters. They include a program that works with individuals with brain injuries, and we can talk in a little while about some of the details of the programs, but what pulls them together is really twofold. One is providing supports and advocacy for individuals with brain injury and their families, and the second is promoting prevention, because I think everybody who's involved or who has had any experience with brain injury would agree that if the injury could have been prevented in the first instance, that would have been the better result.
Now, a brain injury isn't necessarily caused by trauma, right?
Right.
There are many things that can cause a brain injury.
Mm-hmm. They really are, again, quite varied, and there have been a lot of terms bandied about, and so I'm glad you asked the question in that way, because the term that you hear quite frequently is traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Right. But also a term that's now being used now as acquired brain injury, or ABI, and then it gets very complicated between ABI, TBI, what are we talking about? And my concern is, of course, with all of that, it muddies the waters instead of clarifying this. So it's good to start with some clarification. So a brain injury really is something that interrupts the normal functioning of the brain. It can be caused by conditions like anoxia, deprivation of oxygen to the brain, like in a near strangling or a near drowning, that kind of thing. It could be caused by exposure to a toxic substance. It could be caused by other kinds of medication, chemicals. I mean, there's just a range of those an aneurysm, a stroke, those kinds of occurrences. And it also can be caused by what we call the traumatic brain injury, a direct hit to the brain that might be from a car crash, it might be from a fall, it might be from a gunshot wound, or from other kinds of violence. The head is a very common or popular target in, for example, a domestic violence situation. Might be caused by shaking, as in shaken baby syndrome. So it really is a range of causes that interrupt the functioning of the brain. And of course, we hear a lot about brain injury now in the news, both with the gunshot wound to Representative Giffords most recently, but also with the injury that Bob Woodruff, the news anchor, ABC news anchor, had sustained when he was covering the war in Iraq, and from our soldiers coming back, and from professional athletes. We're now hearing a lot more. There's a lot more coverage and acknowledgement of concussion, which is a brain injury, and all in that through playing sports. So it's just a wide range, not one thing.
Now, the symptoms really vary of a brain injury.
Absolutely.
Can you go through some of the symptoms?
Sure, and again, they vary, as you say, they vary quite widely. And the other part of it is that individuals vary, so that what you might see, I'll share some common symptoms, but a person with a brain injury might only have one of those, or might have none at all, and another person might have all of them. So again, it really varies. But I think the hallmark of a brain injury is interference with short-term memory loss. And it's not just forgetting things. It's somebody who had a good memory, was able to remember things. Something happens, and then there's an interruption, and you see a change in behavior. So it might be around memory, it might be headaches, fatigue. That's not just I'm tired. It is a constant, bone-deep kind of exhaustion that really is beyond the, if I sleep, I'll feel better kind of thing. Dizziness, sensitivity to light, a lot of sensitivity to noise. It may be a problem with processing language. So it may be that you're talking to somebody who has a brain injury and you're talking at, well, I speak fast, but I would say this is my normal speed, which is usually okay to follow, but now the individual, it just may be as if I wasn't fast forward. Or not being able to retrieve words in the way that individual used to be. But usually we talk about the most common symptoms really have to do with the memory issues, word processing, fatigue, headaches, chronic headaches, and an inability to kind of do things in sequence. But it will depend on where in the brain the injury occurred, what part of the brain's functioning was interrupted, what state the brain was in before it was injured, the age, the condition of the individual, how quick there was a medical response, if there was a medical response. And again, there may not have been a medical response at the point of injury.
Right.
Some of those kinds of things, those kinds of factors. But if you think of the brain as your body's computer, and then you think of all the things that at least go wrong with my computers in the course of any, even 5 minutes.
Exactly.
All of the interruptions,
Peripheral
all of the
devices.
things that seem to come out of nowhere. I turn on the computer and suddenly it starts doing something I never
Right.
saw before. If you have that picture in your mind, it helps you understand what happens to the brain also. When something happens out of nowhere, something occurs that interrupts the way the brain is accustomed to functioning.
Can coping skills also be affected by all of
Absolutely.
that?
Oh,
Are they
absolutely.
more irritable or agitated in some cases?
In some cases, that certainly is the case. You may have an individual who was the most mild-mannered, funny, easygoing person who sustains a brain injury, and if that's the part of the brain that was injured, this individual may become very loud, kind of blurting things out, losing an ability to check yourself before you speak, totally uninhibited.
I've definitely seen
those
that before.
those kinds of things. So that certainly can happen, but it also can happen in the reverse. And one of the challenges we have is so many people get information from movies, from television shows, from, all sorts of popular media that we get so, it's kind of like the person's in a coma for an extended period of time and then wakes up and it's as if nothing happened. And by the way, the person who was a horrible person is now the most wonderful person, and it's not real. I mean, yeah, that all may happen over time, but that's not real, and that's not the whole story. So it really, I know it's a hard answer to say it depends, but it really does depend.
And does it fluctuate over time?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so you see people, that I think is the good news, with this is you see people who may start out right after an injury with very, very, very serious challenges. And over time, with appropriate care and support and a lot of hard work and determination, people make tremendous progress towards addressing some of the challenges or towards creating a different reality for themselves, a new normal. Somebody I was with recently was talking about. And really creating what that will look like for them. So the good news is there's always hope, and very, very real. I mean, one of the things I have to say, one of the privileges I have in doing this work, and I've been doing it now at the Brain Injury Association for close to 16 years, is that although many days are filled with just listening and trying to help people move from the most horrendous kinds of loss and situations to seeing the really heroic and incredibly inspiring people and places where people are, and that's that's the life, that's the hope. And that's the support and the sharing that becomes such an important part of this thing we call brain injury.
And that's a good segue for Robin here. Can you please tell us what happened to you?
Sure. Well, my injury was in 1995. I was in a bad car accident. At that time, I was happily married, 2 teenagers, had a great profession. I was a dental hygienist, loved my work, loved my patients, and life was good. And I was in a rear-end collision, and from that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. Was taken to the hospital, had the normal testing done, CT scans, MRIs, everything checked out okay. They told me that I had sustained a very serious concussion and that I would be fine. So I believed that. And I tried to go back to life as I had known it, but it just wasn't happening. I couldn't, I basically couldn't get out of my own way. I couldn't figure out normal routines, became very foreign to me. I didn't know what order my clothes went on. I didn't know how to follow a recipe. I couldn't read. I couldn't write. I was, missing letters. Things were transposed. It was almost like I had become dyslexic. I had a lot of physical problems, too, with right-sided weakness. I couldn't follow conversations. I was just scrambled, totally scrambled, had no sense of directions. After the couple of weeks that I took to, kind of feel better, I attempted to go back to my work and couldn't find my way to the place I had worked at for 7 years. My mapping skills were gone. When I finally did get there with some help from my husband, I didn't know how to do my job. I had lost all of my ability to do my profession, which I had done so well for so long. I had no idea what my dental instruments were used for. I had patients, backing up in the waiting room because I couldn't stay on task. I was so severely fatigued. And like Judy said, it's not your normal fatigue where if I just take a little rest, I'll feel better. This was to the core of me. I was just so exhausted. It was a battle. It was hard because I was trying to go through the motions of my life, but things weren't computing and connecting. And, as a result, my family members were becoming very short-tempered and, impatient and wondering rather why I just wasn't getting better. And I was doing the same thing, second-guessing myself. I'm told, the doctors are telling me I'm fine. Why isn't this getting better? Why am I feeling so badly about myself and having such a hard time? Couldn't go into a grocery store. The lights, the fluorescent lighting was so debilitating. The colors, the scents. When you walk into a grocery store, you're usually in the produce department. And as you know, there's just so much to look at and so much coming at you and signage and people and baskets, and I'd be stuck there. I couldn't move. I'd be immobilized. And, again, not understanding what was wrong. And then I would still make the effort to get through the grocery store and get the things that I would have on a list. And the funny story, although at the time it didn't feel so funny, I had gone with the purpose of buying spaghetti sauce.
Okay.
So when I saw it on the end cap, I took 3 bottles and put it into the cart and was trying to follow what was on my list and, being distracted and overloaded by everything else that was going on. I picked up the other few items, and when I got to the checkout, I had 8 bottles of spaghetti sauce because I had picked up more not knowing what I had already put in the basket. And I got home and my husband was like, well, what is this all about? I had no idea of what I was doing. It was just very difficult to stay in the game of life. It really was a challenge. After a lot of meeting with doctors and trying to explain what I was dealing with, there were several that were clueless about brain injury, and then there were the few that were helpful and sent me in the right direction, on the right path, getting the right rehabilitation and support services, and being diligent about wanting to get better. And it's 16 years later. I've made great strides, as Judy can tell you, from the day I first walked into the Brain Injury Association, desperate for help, not knowing where to turn. So life can get better. It will look a lot different than it did initially, but there's hope for everyone out there, and it's just trying to find the right providers, the right support, and just being determined. I do run a women's support group. I should back up. I did get involved with the Brain Injury Association as a volunteer, and over the years got involved with the board and am now one of the vice presidents of the New York State Brain Injury Association, of which I'm extremely proud of, and run a women's support group that is quite successful. I meet with other women that have been in similar situations from whatever, be it stroke, accident, domestic violence. And it's a great outlet for us to share and compare and realize that we're not alone. That these symptoms that they're dealing with are not just theirs, that other people understand. And it's being validated. It's hearing that, you can get through this, and there are other people that are struggling too. It's a long road. It can be a tough journey, but it can have a great outcome. And my world is probably a lot smaller now than it had been, but it's wonderful.
Because relationships get more difficult.
Relationships,
and being out gets more difficult, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have learned over the years how to select the activities that I'm going to engage in. I have to protect myself, and it's not that the symptoms and the struggles go away. It's the ability to cope with them and, and self-preserve. Just make sure you take care of yourself and do what's necessary to keep your strength and to move forward.
Well, thank you. Judy, can you talk about the programs and services for the Brain Injury Association?
Sure, and I think the best way to start is just to pick up on some of the comments Robin made. The first is the real the connection and understanding you're not alone, because very often, as Robin explained, people who sustain brain injuries that are not immediately apparent are told everything's fine, you're fine, and you end up turning inward and saying, what's wrong with me? I'm supposed to be better. Why am I feeling this way? And since the messages you're getting from everybody around you are get over it, when we get calls from people, we frequently, the words that come up in the way people say they're described by others is lazy and crazy. why don't you get up and do something? You're so
Because I'm
lazy.
tired all the time.
Or you must be out of your mind, and those kinds of things. And particularly when on the surface, it doesn't look like you have anything that's different. Your brain obviously is not visible. So we often talk about making the invisible visible. How do we make this real for people who might be looking at Robin or at other people and saying, what
They
you
have to be
talking about?
accepting
They're
of all of
fine,
it.
I probably should just
patient.
interject right here to just explain what it takes to be put together. I can't, like most people, just open up the closet in the morning and say, I'm going to put this, this, and this on. I have learned over the years that if I have to plan ahead, I write everything down, and if I have to come to the studio today, every detail of what I'm going to put on has to be figured out well in advance. So there's no snap decisions, and I think that's an important thing.
Very
It's
important.
learning strategies and coping.
But I think awareness is important too. I mean,
It's-
when you're at a customer service point and you're dealing with somebody that's experienced brain injury, and you're saying to yourself, "Oh, this person is just ridiculous.
Right.
Oh, I can't believe it."
Right.
Well, they have to be more understanding to where people might be coming from, right?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we often say that when we do trainings or work with people who work with other people, is before you get totally exasperated with the person because you've repeated the same thing a gazillion times and saying, don't you remember, I just told you this, before you throw your hands up and decide this is the most frustrating pain in the butt person you've had to deal with, take a minute and think,
Where are they coming
could this
from?
person have a brain injury? Could this person's behavior be because they can't function in another way, because they don't have the memory?
Right.
Could I be saying, why don't I write that down for you? Let me take you to the place where you might find the produce or in the library. Let me take you there.
Right.
And show you, so that you're not saying, oh yeah, it's down in aisle 6
Yeah,
or whatever, and you're looking, oh my God. So many of the services that we provide really are tied together by this notion of providing support for individuals with brain injury and their families. So we have an extensive information and resource clearinghouse that's accessed over the telephone, it's accessed through the website, or physically coming into the office. That really has to do with trying to help people sort out what's going on and linking them with appropriate resources or information, or it might be a support group so that you help combat the we are not alone. It might be a family roundtable, a family forum, which Robin also runs. Some of those in this area, we have them around the state as well, that provides a safe place for family members
So
to
important.
come and talk about what their challenges are, because although the individual who experiences the brain injury certainly experiences it most directly, it has an impact on everybody around that person.
Sure.
And so it's
Certainly
important.
does.
It's
Absolutely.
important for family members and friends to be able to say, I'm frustrated, whatever it is, or help me figure out how to do this. So a lot is around those functions. We have a program called FACS, Family Advocacy Counseling and Training Services, which is a mouthful, that supports a network of staff we have around the state that work directly with individuals who sustain injuries before the age of 22. That's because of the funding mechanism. And their families, again, providing advocacy support, linkage with services, support groups, those kinds of things. And we do a lot of advocacy and a lot of training. We do a lot of public education, conferences, programs, trainings for different service providers.
Well, who do you train?
Well, and again, that also is varied. I would say not enough because we think we need to train the world, or at least educate the
Absolutely.
world.
Absolutely.
And
I mean-
so that's why we especially appreciate opportunities like this to reach the public about brain injury. But for example, I am working with a hospital, large hospital that has a very large brain injury program. We're just invited to train their social workers. So we've trained social workers, we've trained therapists, we've trained doctors, we've trained direct care staff. We've done programs at the Library Association conference. We've done programs with law enforcement. It's really anybody who might be in contact with somebody with a brain injury, which frankly is
everyone.
everybody.
Everybody.
We don't have enough resources to train the world, but it really is part of that. And again, the trainings will vary depending on what brings people to those trainings. We train teachers, nurses, just a whole range of audiences about brain injury or about working with or supporting people with brain injury, different strategies. We've done a lot of work recently with the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence on providing information and strategies for domestic violence providers and shelters about supporting women who have been abused. So it really is a whole range of people, but that's all within the kind of first part of our services, the largest part of the umbrella really, which is what can we do to provide supports for individuals with brain injury and their families. And we also have been doing training around advocacy, helping people understand how to speak for themselves or speak for a family member, and also to take their stories, like Robin's story, which is so powerful and so important, and share that with policymakers, with legislators, so that we can inform public policy around that. And then the other part is kind of other large umbrella, has to do with prevention.
Right.
And there we really work around promoting helmets.
For children or for
seatbelt.
everyone?
Well, we promote them for everyone. Because as I remember sitting with one of my children when she was much younger, and it was, weather that was in the spring, those days we love around here that, you're not freezing, so you think about taking out a bicycle. And we see the picture that we all see, which is the child with the helmet and the parent or the adult with no helmet. And her line, which was just so perfect, as out of the mouths of babes, was, "Don't grown-ups' heads get hurt too?" Perfect. And it's like, well, if she can figure that out
Then
at the age of 6 or 7,
Exactly.
why can't the grown-ups figure that out? Nothing magic happens. Your head doesn't get any harder as you get older. It's such a disconnect about that. So we promote the helmets for everybody because things happen. I mean, that's the thing of it.
And people have to keep their helmets on once they put
that's
them on.
right. They have to.
Because I see the kids.
They
and
have to
it's
position
down their
right,
head.
or we say the helmet on the handlebars is not going to
gonna
do
help.
you a
No.
whole lot of
Not
good.
gonna help.
Definitely not.
So helmets, seat belts, the cell phones, text, all of those kinds of things. We also promote, we're against those when you're driving. And you look in cars. I mean, people are doing everything. They're putting on makeup, they're leaning down, they're doing this and that, everything but driving. And car crashes are a major cause of brain injury. And so,
Yes, they are.
if we can focus on doing what we're doing and not everything else, that would help. We also have programs, particularly for kids, about nonviolent conflict resolution, because again, so much.
You don't have to beat on each other.
Right, right. There are other ways, and it's the old use your words, but there are other ways to resolve conflicts. And if you look in urban areas in New York State, gunshot assaults are the leading cause of brain injury for the high-risk group, the 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, isn't most of that preventable? Isn't all of that preventable? So you know, you step back and ask yourself those kinds of questions. Isn't it, if we can do
Right.
something to prevent this, why aren't we doing it? And so part of the information is about prevention and is about access to resources. We have a tremendous amount on our website. We also have a special computer-based program called LearnNet, and you can get to it on a click on our website. And that is an extraordinary amount of information designed particularly to support school-age children who are back in school. Because, again, one of the things you'll see with kids, particularly because their brains are still developing, is after an injury, the A student might still be an A student or might not. But the A student who stayed an A student might 2 years later become suddenly, or it will seem like suddenly out of nowhere, start really having trouble in school or behaving differently. And that will be because that part of the brain is now kicking in, the part that's injured that you maybe didn't pick up originally because it wasn't being asked to do whatever the function is. But then becomes that way. So that's another resource.
Now, can you quickly mention for advocacy the Concussion Management and Awareness Acts?
Right.
What is that doing for New York State?
Well, this is a piece of legislation that was passed in this session of the legislature that really looks at the issue about concussion management for school athletes, for student athletes. Although, frankly, the issue is much broader than just student athletes. But this piece of legislation focuses on that population, and basically comes from a place of saying, you know, yeah, everybody says concussion is just a ding and, you know, you move on. But we're saying, we, the state legislature, we, the people of New York State, are saying we can't dismiss this. Because when we dismiss it, and when we put a kid right back in the game, we are not allowing for, we're not saying, wait a minute, something might have happened there. We need to figure out if there's an injury here.
So it's guidelines
so
for athletic
it's guideline, well, for school-based. So it really goes through the school districts. Athletic trainers have been involved. PE teachers have been involved. Physicians have been involved. We've been involved around that to try to promote better policies around protecting these student athletes. And I hope by extension, everybody else, because again, a concussion is a brain injury. It's I will say, so-called mild brain injury. And that's one of the worst terms because, as Robin had explained, there's really, for the person who's sustained that injury, there's really nothing mild about it. It's just, you know, that's a label that has to do with the moment of injury, not with the impact on your life.
Exactly, the long-lasting impacts.
So, organizational membership and volunteer opportunities for your organization.
Yes.
How do they do that?
Primarily through the website. That's the easiest way, which is www.b as in brain, IANYS.org. And all the information is there. And we would love to have Robin started as a volunteer, and she shared some of her volunteer activities, and we really rely on those.
It's a wonderful organization.
And there's a place for everybody who wants to be involved, whether or not you've experienced a brain injury.
Right. You don't have to be a brain injury survivor to volunteer or be a member. Okay. All right. And now we have to talk about, just list the websites again. Byanis.org. Learnet.org.
.net, actually. So that one's easier. That's why I'm saying it's actually there's a click off our website that will do that.
All right. And the phone number, please?
Well, since we're local, it's, I'm used to saying 459-7911.
Okay. And then I have two other phone numbers, 1-800-228-8201.
Right. That's our toll-free number.
Is the toll-free. And then the family helpline.
Is You have the number.
1-800-444-6443.
Right. Those are both, those two 800 numbers are really, they're kind of called the
Okay.
family helpline, but actually, any number you call will get you help. So even though we have it labeled that way, of course, here it would be a local call, so. But we would love for people to contact us if we could provide information, resources, connections, or volunteer opportunities.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. And I just want to say in closing that our motto at the Brain Injury Association is that a brain injury is the last thing on your mind until it's the only thing on your mind.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's important for people to know, and know that there's help and there's great resources.
Well, thank you very much for coming in today, and thank you for everything that you do for the community.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. It's our pleasure, and thank you for your interest. It's a very important part of our public awareness
Sure is.
efforts.
Thanks for watching. We hope to see you next time on Focus on Health.